20 minutes before Lauren was supposed to walk down the aisle to marry the Duke, she found him in the East Vestry, lips locked with her own cousin, Chloe, while he confessed the only reason he was marrying her was for the Whitcomb fortune. She stood there, in her perfect white gown, frozen, as he called her a bloodless automaton who felt nothing, hearing every cruel word that shattered 2 years of meticulous planning in 60 seconds. What she did next didn't just ruin the wedding. It ignited a war with the most powerful man in London, and the only person who could protect her was his greatest rival. If you're ready to enjoy this story, click that subscribe button, like this video, and comment where you're watching from. Your support helps us bring more wonderful stories, and trust me, you won't want to miss them. Now, let's get into the story. The grand cathedral was a blur of soaring arches and stained glass brilliance, the air thick with the overpowering scent of 1,000 white lilies. Lauren Whitcomb, elegant even in the last fraught moments before destiny, smoothed the heavy satin of her bridal gown. At 27, she was the epitome of her family's ambition, graceful, meticulously organized, and now, finally, the bride of Duke Evan Radcliffe. "Just minutes now," she murmured to her reflection in the full-length mirror discreetly placed in the sacristy. Her movements were precise, a habit born of years spent controlling every detail of her life. Every aspect of this day, the most important of her life, had been orchestrated by her over the last 2 years. The guest list, the music, the flawless synchronization of every attendant. It was all a testament to her meticulous control. This marriage was not merely a love match. It was the final brilliant move that would cement the Whitcomb name at the absolute peak of London society. Duke Evan, handsome in his scarlet ceremonial uniform, was the most coveted catch in the kingdom, and their union was the most celebrated event of the season. Lauren reminded herself of the glittering future, the perfect life she had planned. Yet even through the haze of anticipation, a tiny, chilling doubt persisted. Sometimes, when Evan looked at her, his eyes seemed to hold the focused, impersonal scrutiny of a banker, not a lover. A low, insistent whisper from the doorway drew her attention. "The organist is taking his place, Miss Lauren." "Thank you," she replied, composing her expression. She knew she should wait, but the weight of the moment was suddenly suffocating. Her nerves, usually ironclad, were fraying at the edges. "One small task," she whispered, glancing at the empty stand where her bouquet should have been placed. It was a deviation from the schedule, a tiny imperfection she felt compelled to fix. "I need my arrangement from the East Vestry. I'll be back in 60 seconds. Slipping away from the watchful eyes of the attendants, Lauren moved down a secluded side hallway. The silence here was absolute, a sudden, heavy relief. She heard hushed voices ahead. 2 voices, one distinctly deep and familiar. Her heart lifted, thinking Evan was waiting, eager for a stolen moment. She quickened her step toward the open door of the vestry, a smile forming on her face. It was the last perfect smile she would ever wear. She paused just inside the doorway, her breath catching sharply in her throat as the scene before her slammed the world shut. There, illuminated by a single shaft of afternoon light, was Duke Evan Radcliffe, in his scarlet and gold, not with a pre-wedding jitters, but locked in a fervent, desperate kiss with Chloe Merriweather, her beautiful cousin. For a single suspended heartbeat, Lauren's mind refused to process the image. It was impossible. This was her wedding day. Evan was waiting for her at the altar. This could not be real. But Chloe's pale blue gown, the one Lauren herself had selected for her cousin just 3 weeks ago, was unmistakable. and those broad shoulders in scarlet and gold belonged to the man she was supposed to marry in less than 10 minutes. The world tilted sickeningly. Lauren gripped the doorframe, her knuckles bone-white against the dark wood, her breath shallow and silent. She should leave. She should turn and walk away before they saw her. But her body refused to obey, frozen in the awful gravity of the moment. Then Evan pulled back slightly, his hand still cradling Chloe's face with a tenderness Lauren had never seen directed at herself. His voice, low and fervent, carried clearly across the small vestry. "God, Chloe, I can't do this. I can't stand there and speak those vows knowing it's all a lie." Chloe's fingers traced the gold braid on his uniform, her voice a soft, practiced murmur. "You have no choice, darling. You said it yourself. Without the Whitcomb fortune, Radcliffe Hall will be lost by autumn. Your estates, your title, everything your family built." "I know." Evan's voice was raw with frustration. "Believe me, I know exactly what I'm selling myself for. 50,000 a year and those railway investments her father controls. It's the only reason I'm here. The only reason I proposed to her in the first place." The words struck Lauren like physical blows. Each syllable carved away another layer of the life she thought she had built. The Whitcomb fortune. The only reason. She felt the cold spread through her chest, numbing and absolute. "She's kind, at least," Chloe offered, though her tone suggested this was meager consolation. "And she'll manage your household beautifully. You know how she plans everything." Evan laughed, a bitter, hollow sound. "She plans everything because she feels nothing. Do you know, in 2 years of courtship, I've never once seen her genuinely surprised or spontaneous. She's like a beautiful automaton, executing the perfect performance of a society wife. It will be a bloodless, perfectly organized marriage." "And I'll be here," Chloe whispered, leaning into him again. "We'll find our moments. We always have." The rage came then, sudden and clarifying, burning away the shock. Lauren felt it rise from somewhere deep and primal, a place she had spent her entire life suppressing. Her hands trembled, but not from fear. She stepped fully into the room, her wedding gown rustling with the sudden movement. "How long?" Her voice cut through the intimate space like a blade. Both Evan and Chloe sprang apart, Chloe's hand flying to her mouth, her face draining of color. Evan's expression shifted rapidly, shock, guilt, then something harder and more calculating. "Lauren," he began, but she raised one gloved hand, silencing him with a gesture that surprised even herself. "How long?" she repeated, her voice shaking now but her gaze unflinching. "How long have you been planning this travesty?" Chloe moved first, taking a stumbling step backward, her eyes wide and gleaming with tears that Lauren knew, with sudden cruel clarity, were entirely performative. "Lauren, please, you don't understand." "I understand perfectly." Lauren's voice was gaining strength, the tremor transforming into something forged and dangerous. "I understand that my fiancé has been courting me for my father's fortune while conducting an affair with my own cousin. I understand that this wedding, this entire charade I have spent 2 years orchestrating, has been nothing but a financial transaction to save your crumbling estates." Evan's jaw tightened, and for a moment she saw something flicker in his eyes. Perhaps shame, perhaps merely irritation at being caught. "You're being hysterical," he said, his tone shifting to the patronizing calm of a man accustomed to controlling situations. "This is unfortunate timing, I'll grant you, but we can discuss this rationally after the ceremony." "After?" The word came out as a sharp, disbelieving laugh. You believe I would still marry you after this? You have no choice. Evan's voice hardened, the mask of the perfect gentleman finally slipping. The guests are assembled. Your family's reputation is at stake. If you call this off now, you'll be ruined. No one will have you. You'll be the jilted bride, the laughingstock of London society. Lauren felt the truth of his words like ice in her veins. He was right. The scandal would be catastrophic. Her mother would never forgive her. Her father's business connections, all carefully cultivated through the promise of this alliance, would crumble. She would be exiled from everything she had ever known. And yet, looking at Evan's cold, calculating expression, at Chloe's beautiful, treacherous face, Lauren realized with sudden, blazing clarity that she would rather face absolute ruin than spend a single day shackled to this lie. She walked forward, her movements deliberate and controlled, until she stood directly before Evan. Without breaking his gaze, she extended her left hand. My ring, now. Evan's eyes narrowed. Don't be foolish, Lauren. Think about what you're throwing away. I said now. Her voice was iron wrapped in silk, shaking, but absolutely immovable. Or I will walk into that cathedral and tell every single person exactly what I discovered here. I will describe in precise detail how the Duke of Radcliffe was found kissing my cousin minutes before our wedding, how he confessed that his only interest in me was financial. I will burn us both, Evan. Do not doubt me. For a long moment they stood locked in silent battle. Then something in Evan's expression shifted. Perhaps recognition that the meticulous, controlled Lauren Whitcomb had finally found something she couldn't plan her way around, and had chosen devastation over deception. His hand moved to his pocket. He withdrew the engagement ring she had given him to hold during the ceremony. The Whitcomb diamond that had belonged to her grandmother. He dropped it into her outstretched palm without a word. Lauren's fingers closed around it, the metal cold and sharp against her skin. She looked once more at Chloe, who stood frozen and pale, then back at Evan. I hope Radcliffe Hall is worth your soul, she said quietly. Then she turned, her magnificent wedding gown sweeping behind her, and walked out of the vestry into the catastrophic unknown. The corridor seemed endless. Lauren's vision had narrowed to a tunnel, her breath coming in short, controlled gasps that threatened to break into something wild and uncontrollable. Behind her, she heard Evan's sharp footsteps, his voice rising with command. Lauren, stop this at once. You're being irrational. She didn't turn, couldn't turn. If she stopped moving, if she allowed herself one moment of hesitation, the enormity of what she was about to do would paralyze her completely. The cathedral loomed ahead, its massive doors leading to the nave where 300 guests waited in perfumed anticipation. She veered sharply left instead, toward the vestibule where her family had gathered. Her mother saw her first. Lady Margaret Whitcomb, resplendent in pearl-grey silk, her face a carefully maintained mask of aristocratic composure, took one look at Lauren's expression and went absolutely still. Lauren? Darling, what are you? The procession is about to begin. The wedding is off. Lauren's voice sounded strange to her own ears, distant and hollow. I will not be marrying the Duke. The words fell into the elegant space like stones into glass. Her mother's face drained of color. Her father, Thomas Whitcomb, turned from his conversation with the bishop, his heavy brows drawing together in confusion and rising anger. What nonsense is this? His voice was low and dangerous, the tone he used in his study when business matters displeased him. Lauren Catherine Whitcomb, you will explain yourself immediately. Evan appeared in the doorway behind her, his scarlet uniform a slash of color against the grey stone. His face had rearranged itself into an expression of concerned bewilderment, the perfect performance of a worried bridegroom. "I apologize, sir. Lady Lauren has had a moment of wedding nerves, quite understandable given the magnitude of the occasion." He was kissing Chloe. The words came out flat and factual, stripped of all emotion. "I found them in the East Vestry." He told her the only reason he's marrying me is for the Whitcomb fortune, that I'm a bloodless automaton who will manage his household while he continues his affair with my cousin. Her mother's hand flew to her throat. Her father's face turned a mottled crimson. But before either could speak, Evan stepped forward, his voice smooth and regretful. "Lady Lauren is clearly overwrought. I'm afraid she misinterpreted a familial farewell. Miss Merriweather was emotional about the wedding, and I was merely offering comfort." "Liar!" Lauren turned to face him fully, and the fury in her voice made him stop mid-sentence. "I heard every word. I heard you tell her that marrying me was selling yourself, that I feel nothing, that our marriage would be a financial transaction to save your failing estates." "Lauren, lower your voice." Her mother had found her composure, her tone sharp with command and rising panic. "People will hear. The guests. Good God, the bishop is standing right there." "I don't care." And Lauren realized with dizzying clarity that she meant it. "I will not marry him." Her father moved then, crossing the space in 3 strides, his hand closing around her arm with bruising force. "You will do exactly as you're told. This wedding has been planned for 2 years. Every important family in England is sitting in that cathedral. Our business interests, our reputation, everything we've built depends on this alliance. Then it will have to fall." Lauren tried to pull away, but his grip tightened. "You selfish, foolish girl." His voice was shaking with rage. "Do you have any idea what you're throwing away? The scandal will destroy us. No one will receive you. No decent man will ever offer for you. You'll be ruined, and you'll take this entire family down with you." "Thomas, please," her mother interjected, her eyes darting toward the bishop, acutely aware of their audience. "Perhaps if we simply delay the ceremony, say that Lauren is unwell. We can smooth this over quietly, discuss it rationally. There's nothing to discuss." Lauren wrenched her arm free with sudden, desperate strength. "I won't do it. I won't stand at that altar and pledge my life to a man who sees me as nothing more than a bank account." Evan's mask finally cracked, his voice turning cold and cruel. "You're making a grave mistake, Lauren. I have friends, influence. If you walk away from this, I'll ensure that every door in London is closed to you. Your reputation will be ashes by nightfall." "Let it burn." The words came from somewhere deep and fierce, a part of herself Lauren hadn't known existed. "I'd rather live in ruins than in your cage." She turned toward the side door, the one leading to the courtyard, but her father moved to block her path. "You step through that door, and you are no longer my daughter, no longer a Whitcomb. I will cut you off without a penny. Do you understand me?" Lauren met his furious gaze, saw the absolute certainty there, and felt something break inside her chest. Not her resolve, that remained iron hard, but the last fragile thread connecting her to the life she'd known, the family she'd tried so desperately to please. "I understand perfectly," she whispered. Then, before anyone could stop her, she pushed past him and ran. The door crashed open, and she was outside in the spring sunlight, her wedding gown a billowing cloud of white satin and lace. Behind her, she heard her mother's anguished cry, her father's roar of rage, the sudden commotion as they realized she was truly leaving. The courtyard was full of late-arriving guests, their faces turning toward her in shock and dawning scandal. She didn't stop. Her slippers slapped against the cobblestones as she ran toward the iron gates, her train dragging behind her like a banner of rebellion. A carriage driver stared at her open-mouthed. A group of society matrons gasped in unison. Somewhere, someone started shouting. Lauren reached the gates and stumbled through them onto the street beyond. Her breath was ragged now, her carefully arranged hair coming loose, tears finally streaming down her face. She had done it. She had walked away from everything, her family, her reputation, her entire future. And Evan was right about one thing. He had power, connections, the ability to destroy what little remained of her standing. If she tried to face this alone, he would crush her utterly, reshape the narrative until she became the hysterical, unstable woman who abandoned a perfect marriage. She needed help. Not just shelter, but protection. Someone with the power and integrity to stand against a duke. Someone who wouldn't be swayed by society's pressure or Evan's influence. Lauren's mind raced through possibilities and discarded them one by one. Then, as she stood trembling on the street corner in her ruined wedding gown, a name surfaced with sudden crystalline clarity. Lord Asher Vance, the Duke's greatest rival. A man known for his unyielding principles and his complete disdain for London's hypocritical social games. If anyone could, or would, stand against Evan Radcliffe, it was him. Lauren straightened, wiping her tears with shaking hands. She had burned her old life to ashes. Now she needed to forge something new from the flames. Lauren had never been to the seedier parts of London, but desperation was a thorough education. She found herself in a narrow street near Covent Garden, still wearing her wedding gown, though she'd managed to borrow a dark cloak from a bewildered flower seller who'd taken pity on her tear-stained face. The woman had asked no questions, merely pressed the worn wool into Lauren's hands and pointed her toward a lodging house where rooms could be had without names. In the dim, spare room that cost her the pearl bracelet from her wrist, Lauren sat at a scarred wooden table and tried to compose the most important letter of her life. Her hands were steadier now, the shock crystallizing into cold purpose. "Lord Vance," she wrote, her penmanship still precise despite everything. "You do not know me, but you know my former fiancé, Duke Evan Radcliffe. I am the woman who was to marry him this afternoon. I discovered him in an intimate embrace with another, and overheard him confess that his sole interest in our union was financial. I have refused to proceed with the wedding." She paused, the quill trembling slightly. What she was about to ask was outrageous, impossible, but she had no other options. "I am aware of your reputation for integrity and your independence from London society's influence. I am also aware that you and the Duke are not allies. I find myself in desperate need of protection from a man with considerable power and every motivation to destroy me for refusing him. I have nowhere else to turn. If you can offer any assistance, I will be at the Crossed Keys Inn on Mortimer Street until midnight. If I do not hear from you, I will understand, and I will trouble you no further." She signed it simply, Lauren Whitcomb, and sealed it with borrowed wax. Getting the message delivered proved easier than she'd feared. A street boy, quick-eyed and shrewd, took the remaining coins from her reticule and promised to deliver it directly to Lord Vance's London residence within the hour. "Big house in Mayfair, innit? I know the one, miss. Black door, iron railings." "It must go directly into a servant's hands," Lauren insisted. "No one else can see it." The boy nodded, already pocketing the coins. "Discretion's worth paying for, and you paid proper. I'll see it done." Then there was nothing to do but wait. The hours crawled past with agonizing slowness. Lauren sat in the corner of the inn's common room, her cloak pulled tight, her face shadowed by the hood. Around her, London's less genteel citizens came and went. Merchants, clerks, a woman who might have been an actress or something less respectable. No one looked at her twice. In this part of the city, a woman in distress was unremarkable. She wondered what was happening at the cathedral. Had her father announced some polite fiction to the assembled guests? Had Evan played the abandoned bridegroom, gathering sympathy? Or had the truth already begun to spread, mutating with each retelling until she became the villain of her own story? It didn't matter now. She had made her choice. The church bells were striking 11 when the inn's door opened and a tall man in simple but well-made traveling clothes entered. He scanned the room with sharp, assessing eyes, then moved directly toward her table. Lauren's heart lurched. "Miss Whitcomb?" His voice was low, carefully neutral. "Yes." She pushed back her hood slightly, just enough for him to see her face. "I'm Thomas Wright, steward to Lord Asher Vance. My lord received your message. He's instructed me to bring you to him, if you're willing." Relief flooded through her so intensely she felt dizzy. "He'll help me." Something shifted in the steward's stern expression, a flicker of what might have been sympathy. "Lord Vance doesn't do things by halves, miss. If he's offered his protection, you'll have it. But I'll be plain with you. The road north is long, and once you take it, there's no easy turning back. Are you certain this is what you want?" Lauren thought of Evan's cold calculations, her father's rage, her mother's desperate concern for appearances over her daughter's dignity. She thought of the life she'd been about to enter, a beautiful prison of lies and financial transactions. "I'm certain," she said quietly. Wright nodded once, decisively. "Then we leave immediately. Lord Vance's carriage is waiting 3 streets over. We've taken precautions to avoid notice, but the faster we're away from London, the safer you'll be." The carriage was indeed unmarked. A well-appointed travelling coach with dark curtains that could be drawn for privacy. Wright handed her up with impersonal efficiency, then climbed up to sit with the driver. The door closed, and Lauren found herself alone in the shadowed interior. As the carriage lurched into motion, she pulled aside the curtain slightly and watched London slide past. The streets grew quieter as they moved away from the city centre, the grand houses giving way to smaller dwellings, then to open road. Somewhere behind her, in drawing rooms and clubs across Mayfair, her name was being torn to shreds. The perfect Lauren Whitcomb, the meticulous planner, had become the scandal of the season. She let the curtain fall and leaned back against the cushioned seat, suddenly exhausted beyond measure. Her wedding day. It should have been the culmination of everything she'd worked for. Instead, it had become the day she'd lost everything: family, reputation, future, security. And yet, beneath the fear and grief, there was something else, something that felt dangerously like freedom. The carriage rolled northward through the spring night, carrying her away from the wreckage of her old life toward an uncertain sanctuary. She didn't know Lord Asher Vance, had never even been introduced to him at any of the countless social functions she'd attended. She knew only his reputation, formidable, principled, a man who'd walked away from London society's games years ago and built his influence through different means. She was placing her entire future in the hands of a stranger, running toward a man she'd never met, because he was the enemy of her enemy. The absurdity of it might have made her laugh if she weren't so frightened. Hours passed. The rocking of the carriage was hypnotic, but Lauren couldn't sleep. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw Evan and Chloe locked in that embrace, heard his cruel words about her bloodless, perfect performance. She pressed her hands to her face, breathing slowly, willing herself to stay calm. Dawn was breaking, pale and grey, when the carriage finally slowed. Lauren peered out to see they'd stopped at a coaching inn, quiet and respectable. Wright appeared at the door. "We'll change horses here, miss. and take some refreshment. We've a long way yet to go. Lord Vance's estate is in Scotland, on the coast. 3 more days of hard travel, if the weather holds." 3 days. Lauren nodded, accepting his hand down from the carriage. Scotland. She'd never been that far north, had never imagined leaving London for more than a country house party. As she stepped into the inn's private parlour, still wearing the ruined wedding gown beneath her borrowed cloak, Lauren realized she was crossing more than just physical distance. She was travelling away from everything she'd ever known, toward a future she couldn't begin to imagine. All she could do was trust that Lord Asher Vance's reputation for integrity was deserved, and that she hadn't just traded one cage for another. The salt wind hit Lauren's face the moment she stepped from the carriage, so fierce and cold it stole her breath. After 3 days of cramped travel, the sheer vastness of the landscape was almost overwhelming. Grey-green cliffs plunged toward a steel-coloured sea that crashed against black rocks far below. The sky was enormous here, heavy with racing clouds that cast moving shadows across the wild moorland. There were no manicured gardens, no ornamental hedges, no carefully constructed views. Just raw, wind-swept beauty that made London's drawing rooms feel like suffocating boxes. Thornwell House rose from the headland like it had been carved from the same dark stone as the cliffs themselves. It was imposing. 3 stories of solid, unadorned architecture, with narrow windows that gleamed like watchful eyes. But there was a stark honesty to it that Lauren found oddly comforting. This was a house built to withstand storms, not to impress dinner guests. Wright helped her down, steadying her when the wind caught her travelling cloak and nearly pulled her off balance. "Welcome to Thornwell, Miss Whitcomb. Lord Vance is expecting you." Lauren's heart hammered against her ribs. For 3 days, she'd been moving toward this moment, and now that it had arrived, she felt suddenly acutely aware of the madness of what she'd done. She was about to meet a man she knew only by reputation, having thrown herself on his mercy with nothing but a desperate letter and the borrowed clothes on her back. The heavy oak door opened before they reached it. A stern-faced woman in black stood in the entrance, her expression unreadable. "Mr. Wright, Miss Whitcomb, come in, quickly now, before the wind steals the warmth from the house." The interior was a revelation. Lauren had expected something austere, perhaps even cold, but the entrance hall was lined with rich wood paneling that glowed in the lamplight. A fire roared in a massive stone hearth. The furnishings were simple but of obvious quality, chosen for comfort and function rather than ostentation. It felt lived in, real, in a way her family's London mansion never had. "I'm Mrs. Kellen, the housekeeper," the woman said, giving Lauren a brief but thorough assessment. "Lord Vance is in his study. I'll take you there directly. You'll want some tea after, I expect, and a bath drawn." The practicality of it, the absence of judgment or invasive questions, made Lauren's throat tighten with unexpected emotion. "Thank you," she managed. They walked down a corridor lined with landscapes, Scottish Highlands mostly, painted with more skill than sentimentality. Mrs. Kellen stopped before a door of dark wood and knocked once, firmly. "Enter." The voice from within was deep, quiet, and controlled. The study was lined floor to ceiling with books, their leather spines worn from actual reading rather than decorative display. A large desk sat before windows that overlooked the churning sea, and behind the desk, rising as they entered, was Lord Asher Vance. He was taller than Lauren had expected, broad-shouldered and solid in a way that suggested physical labor, rather than just riding and fencing. His face was strong-featured, weathered from wind and sun, with dark hair that held a few premature threads of silver at the temples. But it was his eyes that held her, grey as the sea outside, direct and intelligent, missing nothing. He was perhaps 35, and he looked at her with an intensity that should have been uncomfortable but somehow wasn't. There was no pity in that gaze, no prurient curiosity about the scandal she'd caused. Just a calm, assessing regard that made her feel, for the first time in days, like a person rather than a problem. "Miss Whitcomb." He inclined his head with old-fashioned courtesy. "I'm glad Wright found you safely. Please, sit. You must be exhausted." Lauren moved to the chair he indicated, her legs suddenly weak. Now that she was here, facing him, the enormity of what she'd done threatened to overwhelm her. "Lord Vance, I don't know how to thank you. I had nowhere else to turn, and I realize how extraordinary it was for you to... You needed help." His voice was matter-of-fact, as if offering sanctuary to desperate runaways was something he did regularly. "I was in a position to provide it. No thanks are necessary." He sat back down, but not behind the imposing desk. Instead, he took the chair opposite hers, keeping a respectful distance but meeting her at eye level. The gesture struck her as deliberate, carefully considered. "I know something of what happened in London," he continued. "Enough to understand why you left. What I need to know now is what you need from me. Temporary shelter until you can make other arrangements. Help contacting family members who might be sympathetic, or something more permanent." The directness was startling after a lifetime of London's endless social circling. Lauren found herself responding with equal honesty. "I don't know. My father has disowned me. My mother will never forgive me for the scandal, and Duke Radcliffe—" She paused, her hands tightening in her lap. "He has power and influence. He told me he would destroy what remained of my reputation, and I believe him. I'm not safe in London. I'm not sure I'm safe anywhere he can reach." Asher's expression didn't change, but something hardened in his eyes. "Radcliffe is a coward who preys on those he believes can't fight back. But his power has limits, Miss Whitcomb, and his reach doesn't extend here." He leaned forward slightly, his voice carrying absolute certainty. "You are under my protection now. That means you are safe. Radcliffe can spread whatever lies he wishes in London. They don't touch you here." The simple conviction in his words made something in Lauren's chest unclench. She'd been braced for conditions, for expectations, for the inevitable price that would be demanded for his help. But there was none of that in his steady gaze. "I won't pretend this will be easy," Asher continued. "You've left behind everything familiar. Thornwell is isolated, and life here is nothing like London society. But if you choose to stay, for as long as you need, you'll have a place here. No questions, no obligations, no judgment. You'll be treated with the respect you deserve, and you'll have the time and space to decide what comes next." Lauren felt tears prick her eyes and blinked them back fiercely. She'd cried enough in the past 3 days. "Why?" The question escaped before she could stop it. "Why would you do this for a stranger?" For the first time, something that might have been a smile touched the corner of his mouth. "Because 3 years ago, I watched London society destroy someone I cared about with lies and manufactured scandal. I had the power to stop it, and I didn't act quickly enough." His voice remained even, but Lauren heard the old anger beneath it. "I won't make that mistake again. And because Radcliffe represents everything I despise about London's aristocracy, the casual cruelty, the assumption that money and title give one the right to use people as chess pieces." He stood, and Lauren rose with him. "Mrs. Kellen will show you to your rooms. Rest, eat. Tomorrow, or whenever you're ready, we can discuss the practicalities. But for now, Miss Whitcomb, know that you are safe." Lauren met his eyes and found herself believing him absolutely. "Thank you, Lord Vance." "Asher," he said quietly, "if you're staying at Thornwell, formality becomes tedious, and you've been through enough without standing on ceremony." As Mrs. Kellen led her from the study and up a wide staircase toward rooms that overlooked the wild, endless sea, Lauren felt something shift inside her. The fear was still there, and the grief, and the uncertainty. But beneath it all, for the first time since she'd fled the cathedral, she felt the fragile beginning of hope. Lauren had been at Thornwell for 4 days before she found the courage to tell the complete story. She'd spent the time in a strange suspension, sleeping deeply for the first time in weeks, taking long walks along the cliff paths with the wind tearing at her hair, and gradually shedding the rigid composure that had defined her for so long. Mrs. Kellen provided simple, nourishing meals and asked no questions. The handful of servants moved quietly through the house, offering help without intrusion. Asher himself had been present but undemanding. They'd shared dinners in the smaller dining room, conversations touching on safe topics, books, the estate's management, the weather patterns of the Scottish coast. He never pressed, never pried, but Lauren felt the weight of the unspoken story between them, and she knew he was waiting for her to be ready. On the 5th morning, she found him in the library, reading correspondence at a desk positioned to catch the grey morning light. He looked up when she entered, and something in her expression made him set down his pen immediately. "May I speak with you?" Her voice was steadier than she'd expected. "About what happened in London. The full truth of it." "Of course." He gestured to the chairs by the fire, where someone had already laid a tea service, as if Mrs. Kellen had anticipated this moment. "I'm listening." Lauren settled into the chair, her hands wrapped around a cup of tea she didn't drink. For a moment, she didn't know where to begin. Then the words simply came, direct and unadorned. "I discovered them in the East Vestry 20 minutes before the ceremony. Evan, Duke Radcliffe, was kissing my cousin Chloe. Not a brief, impulsive moment. A passionate embrace between people who clearly knew each other's touch." She paused, watching Asher's face. It remained calm, attentive, giving nothing away. "But that wasn't the worst of it. I heard them talking. Evan told her he couldn't bear to speak the vows knowing it was all a lie. Chloe reminded him that without the Whitcomb fortune, his estates would be lost by autumn." Asher's expression shifted slightly, a flicker of something dark passing through his eyes. "He said that explicitly, that the marriage was financial. He said it was the only reason he'd proposed to me in the first place. 50,000 a year, and my father's railway investments. That was what he was selling himself for." The old humiliation tried to rise, but Lauren pushed it down, keeping her voice factual. "He called me a beautiful automaton, said I'd manage his household perfectly because I planned everything and felt nothing, that our marriage would be bloodless and perfectly organized." She met Asher's gaze directly. "And he was right, in a way. I had planned everything, every detail of that wedding, of our future life together. I'd convinced myself that was what marriage was, a strategic alliance, properly managed. I never asked myself if I loved him, because I didn't think love was the point." "But you walked away," Asher said quietly. "When you discovered the truth, you didn't rationalize it, or accept it as the cost of the alliance. You refused." "I refused to be used." Lauren set down her teacup with deliberate care. "My father built his fortune through his own efforts. He came from nothing and created an empire through intelligence and relentless work. I'm proud of that. But Evan saw that fortune as something he was entitled to, something he could take without even the courtesy of honesty. He would have married me, taken everything my family built, and given me nothing but public humiliation and private contempt. Asher leaned back in his chair, his fingers steepled thoughtfully. What you may not know, Lauren, is that Radcliffe's situation is far more desperate than even he admitted to your cousin. His father was a spectacular gambler and a terrible manager. The current Duke inherited estates mortgaged to the hilt and investments that exist only on paper. He's been borrowing against his expectations for 2 years, expectations based entirely on his impending marriage to you. Lauren's breath caught. You mean? I mean that when you walked away from that altar, you didn't just deny him a fortune. You destroyed the house of cards he'd built on the assumption that your money would save him. Asher's voice held a grim satisfaction. Every creditor who'd extended him loans based on the Whitcomb alliance will be calling them in. Every investment partner who bought into his schemes will be demanding their money back. By now, a week later, Radcliffe is facing complete financial collapse. Good. The word came out fierce and unrepentant, surprising them both. Lauren felt a flush rise to her cheeks. I'm sorry. That's uncharitable. It's honest. Asher's gray eyes held something that might have been approval. And honesty is far more valuable than charity, particularly when extended to men who deserve neither. You're allowed to be angry, Lauren. You're allowed to be glad that the man who tried to use you is facing consequences. The permission, spoken so directly, released something in Lauren's chest. I am angry, she admitted, not just at Evan, but at myself. I'm supposed to be intelligent, observant. How did I not see what he was? How did I convince myself that his cold appraisal was appropriate restraint? That his lack of genuine feeling was aristocratic dignity? Because you'd been taught that marriage was a transaction. Asher's voice was gentle but unflinching. Because society trained you from birth to value position over passion, strategy over sincerity. You did exactly what you were raised to do. The remarkable thing is that when confronted with the reality of that system, you rejected it entirely. Lauren looked at him, really looked at him, and saw something in his expression that mirrored her own disillusionment. You speak as if you know something of it. I was engaged once, Asher said after a moment. 7 years ago, to a woman chosen by our families for all the appropriate reasons. Complementary estates, suitable connections, compatible positions. We liked each other well enough. It would have been a perfectly adequate marriage. He paused, gazing into the fire. Then I met someone else. Someone entirely unsuitable. A widow of modest means, no family connections, nothing to recommend her but her own considerable mind and spirit. I realized what I'd been about to settle for, what we'd both been about to settle for. What happened? Lauren asked softly. I broke the engagement, honestly, directly, taking full responsibility for the change of heart. Society was displeased, but ultimately accepted it. Then I made the mistake of openly courting the woman I actually cared for. His voice hardened. London society destroyed her. Not quickly, but thoroughly. Whispers about her motives, her character, her past. None of it true, all of it devastating. She couldn't bear it. She left England entirely. And I... He stopped, then continued with quiet finality. I came here, built a life outside society's reach, and I've never regretted leaving that world behind. The silence that followed was profound, but not uncomfortable. Lauren felt the pieces settling into place, Asher's isolation, his immediate response to her plea, his utter disdain for London's games. I'm sorry, she said finally, for what they did to her, to you both. Don't be sorry. Be free. Asher met her eyes with sudden intensity. You've been given a rare gift, Lauren, though it probably doesn't feel like one yet. You've been cut loose from all those expectations, all those careful plans. You can choose what comes next based on what you actually want, not what you've been told to want. That's terrifying, but it's also extraordinary. Lauren felt something shift between them, a recognition of kinship. They were both exiles from the same hypocritical world, both choosing integrity over acceptance. May I ask you something? Anything? Why did you help me? The real reason. Asher smiled, a genuine expression that transformed his austere features. Because your letter was the most direct, honest piece of correspondence I've received in a decade. No manipulation, no coy hints, no social games. Just a clear statement of facts and a respectful request for help. It was refreshing. He paused. And because anyone who could walk away from that much pressure, that much conditioning in defense of their own dignity, is someone worth knowing. Lauren found herself smiling back, feeling the tentative beginning of something she hadn't expected to find in her catastrophic flight north. Genuine friendship. I've never had a conversation like this, she admitted. So direct, so honest. Neither have most people, Asher replied. That's why they find me difficult, but I suspect you'll manage. Outside, the wind howled around Thornwell's solid walls, and the sea crashed against the cliffs. Inside, for the first time in her carefully planned life, Lauren sat in comfortable silence with someone who saw her clearly and didn't find her wanting. The transformation happened so gradually that Lauren didn't notice it until one morning, nearly 3 weeks into her stay at Thornwell, when she caught her reflection in the hallway mirror and didn't immediately recognize herself. The woman staring back had color in her cheeks from wind and sun. Her dark hair, usually tortured into elaborate arrangements, was pulled back in a simple braid. She wore a plain wool dress in deep blue that Mrs. Kellen had procured from somewhere, practical and warm, with none of the restrictive boning and layering that had defined every garment she'd owned in London. Her hands, once carefully protected and pale, showed the faint marks of actual use. She looked alive in a way she never had before. The change had begun small. The first week, she'd done little but sleep and walk the cliff paths, letting the wind scour away the worst of the shock and grief. The second week, restlessness had set in. She'd never been idle in her life, and the lack of purpose began to chafe. She'd found herself wandering into the estate office where Asher worked, initially just seeking company, then staying to listen as he discussed crop rotations with his steward and tenant disputes with his factor. "You're welcome to stay," he'd said when she'd apologized for interrupting, "though I warn you, estate management is far less glamorous than London would have you believe." But Lauren had discovered something unexpected. She was good at it. All those years of meticulous planning, of managing complex social calendars, and coordinating elaborate events, translated beautifully into organizing harvest schedules and streamlining household accounts. Asher had noticed immediately. "You have a remarkable head for figures," he'd observed one afternoon, watching her work through a tangled account book that had frustrated his steward for weeks. "This mess would have taken Morrison days to sort. You've done it in hours." Lauren had felt a flush of pride, entirely different from the social approval she'd once craved. This was recognition of actual competence, of useful skill. "I like problems that have solutions," she'd admitted. "London social politics never made sense to me because the rules were arbitrary and constantly shifting. But this," she gestured at the neat columns of numbers, "this follows logic." After that, Asher had simply started including her in the work. They'd fall into a pattern. Mornings in the estate office, reviewing accounts and correspondence, discussing improvements and investments. Asher valued her opinion, actually listened when she suggested more efficient approaches, and implemented her ideas without condescension or surprise that a woman might understand financial management. It was the afternoons, though, that Lauren came to treasure most. Asher had noticed her watching the horses in Thornwell's stables with poorly concealed longing. In London, she'd ridden occasionally in Hyde Park, sedate circuits on a docile mare, properly attired and rigidly postured, but the horses here were different, hardy Scottish breeds built for rough country, spirited and strong. "Do you ride?" he'd asked one morning. "I was taught," Lauren had replied carefully, "but I'm not accomplished." Accomplishment is a useless word invented by people with nothing better to do. Asher had already been gesturing to the stable master. "Can you stay on a horse at a gallop without falling off?" I think so." "Then you can ride. Everything else is just practice." He'd given her a grey mare named Tempest, sweet-tempered but far more spirited than anything Lauren had ridden before. That first afternoon, with Asher on his great black gelding beside her, they'd ridden out across the moors toward the sea. Lauren had never experienced anything like it. The speed, the power of the horse beneath her, the wind tearing at her hair, the vast open sky overhead. It was terrifying and exhilarating in equal measure. When they'd finally stopped at the cliff's edge, her heart pounding and her breath coming fast, she'd turned to Asher with something like wonder in her face. "I've never felt so alive," she'd said, and he'd smiled that rare, genuine smile. "Neither had I the first time I came here," he'd replied. "London makes you forget what it feels like to be truly free." After that, they rode most afternoons when weather permitted. Sometimes they talked, long-ranging conversations about books, politics, philosophy, the kind of intellectual discourse Lauren had never been permitted in London, drawing rooms where women were expected to discuss fashion and gossip. Asher treated her mind with the same respect he showed her person, challenging her ideas, asking her opinions, engaging with her thoughts as equals. Other times they rode in comfortable silence, and Lauren discovered that silence with Asher was never empty. It was full of understanding, of shared appreciation for the wild beauty around them, of a companionship that didn't require constant performance. One afternoon, nearly a month after her arrival, they'd ridden farther than usual, following a narrow path down to a hidden cove where the sea crashed against black sand. Lauren had dismounted and walked to the water's edge, letting the spray mist her face, her borrowed cloak whipping in the wind. "I used to think freedom meant having perfect control over every circumstance," she said without turning, knowing Asher was behind her. "That if I just planned carefully enough, managed every detail precisely enough, I could be safe, happy." And now? His voice was quiet, nearly lost in the wind. "Now I think I was building an elaborate cage and calling it a palace." She turned to face him, and the words came from somewhere deep and honest. "I had no idea how small I'd made my life, until I left it behind. Every choice I made, every goal I pursued, none of it was really mine. It was all about meeting other people's expectations, fitting into their scripts." Asher's grey eyes were understanding. "It takes courage to see that. More courage to walk away from it. I didn't feel courageous when I ran from that cathedral. I felt terrified and desperate. Courage isn't the absence of fear, Lauren. It's acting despite it." He moved to stand beside her, both of them facing the wild sea. "You've been here a month. You could stay indefinitely if you wished. Or I could help you establish yourself elsewhere, if you'd prefer independence. There's no obligation, no expectation. I want you to know that." Lauren felt the offer settle around her like a gift. No demands, no manipulation, just genuine care for her well-being. "What if I don't know yet what I want?" "Then you take the time to figure it out. There's no rush, no deadline." He paused, then added with characteristic honesty, "Though I confess I'd miss our work together. And our rides. You've become a valued colleague and a friend." The word hung in the salt air between them. Friend. Not a social connection to be leveraged, not a duty to be performed, but genuine companionship freely given and received. "I'd miss it too," Lauren admitted. "This month has been— I don't have words for what it's been. After spending my entire life performing a role, being allowed to just exist, to discover what I actually enjoy rather than what I'm supposed to enjoy." She broke off, emotion tightening her throat. "You don't have to explain it to me," Asher said gently. "I know exactly what you mean." They stood together in the wind as the sun began its slow descent toward the horizon, painting the sea in shades of silver and gold. Lauren felt something settle inside her, a quiet certainty. She didn't know yet what her future held, didn't know if she'd stay at Thornwell forever, or eventually forge some other path. But for the first time in her carefully planned life, she wasn't afraid of the uncertainty. She had discovered something worth more than security or status or social approval. She had discovered herself, not the polished performance, but the genuine woman beneath, strong, capable, with passions and opinions and a mind that deserved to be used for more than planning seating charts. And she had found, in this isolated corner of Scotland, a friendship based on honesty and mutual respect, the kind she'd never known existed. As they rode back to Thornwell through the gathering dusk, Lauren felt something she'd never associated with her future before. Anticipation without anxiety. Whatever came next, she would face it as herself, no longer constrained by other people's expectations. It was terrifying. It was exhilarating. It was freedom. The letter arrived on a grey morning 6 weeks after Lauren had fled London. She was in the estate office with Asher, reviewing the autumn planting schedules, when Mrs. Kellen entered with the post on a silver tray. Her expression was grimmer than usual. "This came by special courier from Edinburgh, my lord. The man said it was urgent and waited for a reply." Asher took the letter, glanced at the seal, and his face hardened. "It's addressed to Miss Whitcomb." He handed it to Lauren without opening it. "From London, by the look of it." Lauren's hand trembled slightly as she took the heavy cream envelope. The seal was unfamiliar, not her family's crest, but the paper was expensive, the handwriting educated and careful. She broke the seal and unfolded the single sheet, scanning the contents with growing disbelief. "Miss Whitcomb, I write to you as a friend of your family, deeply concerned for your welfare during this difficult time. As you may be aware, Duke Radcliffe has shown extraordinary compassion regarding the unfortunate incident at the cathedral. Rather than pursuing legal action for breach of contract or publicly denouncing your behavior, His Grace has chosen to protect your reputation by explaining to concerned parties that you suffered a temporary nervous collapse brought on by the stress of wedding preparations. This generous fiction has been largely accepted by society, who view you with sympathy rather than censure. The Duke has made it known that he remains committed to the marriage and is willing to proceed with a quiet, private ceremony once you have recovered your health and returned to London. However, this goodwill cannot last indefinitely. Already there are whispers that your prolonged absence suggests something more scandalous than mere nerves. Your family's position grows more precarious by the day. Your father's business relationships are suffering, and your mother has been forced to withdraw from society due to the strain. I urge you most strongly to accept the Duke's generous offer, return to London, proceed with the marriage quietly, and this entire unfortunate episode can be forgotten. His Grace is willing to overlook your temporary instability in recognition of your family's value to him. The alternative, I must warn you, is complete social destruction not only for yourself but for your parents and any future siblings might hope to establish. The Duke is being remarkably patient, but even his patience has limits. Please consider carefully and choose wisely. Your concerned friend, Lady Patricia Ashford. Lauren read it twice, her initial shock crystallizing into something colder and sharper. She set the letter down on the desk with deliberate calm and looked up to find Asher watching her intently. "Bad news?" he asked quietly. "That depends on one's perspective." Her voice was steadier than she'd expected. "According to this, I suffered a mental breakdown brought on by wedding nerves. Duke Radcliffe, in his infinite compassion, is willing to overlook my temporary insanity and proceed with a quiet marriage once I've recovered and returned to London like a good, obedient girl." Asher's expression went absolutely glacial. "May I?" She pushed the letter across the desk. Watching him read it, she saw his jaw tighten, a muscle jumping in his cheek. When he finished, he set it down with controlled precision. "Temporary instability," he said, his voice dangerously soft. "He's rewritten the entire narrative. In his version, you're not a woman who discovered his betrayal and had the courage to refuse him. You're a hysteric who broke under pressure and needs to be managed. And if I don't return and submit to this quiet ceremony, he'll stop protecting my reputation and destroy what's left of my family's standing." Lauren felt oddly detached, as if she were analyzing someone else's crisis. "It's quite clever, actually. He's positioned himself as the magnanimous victim, and me as the unstable woman who needs saving. If I contradict his story, I sound exactly like the mad woman he's painted me to be." "You're not going back?" It wasn't a question, but there was something fierce and protective in Asher's tone that made her chest tighten. "No." The word came out firm and absolute. "I'm not." She stood and walked to the window, looking out at the wild grey sea. Behind her, she heard Asher rise as well, but he didn't approach, giving her space to process. 6 weeks ago, that letter would have terrified me," Lauren said quietly. "The threat to my family, to my reputation, to everything I'd been raised to value. It would have sent me running back to London, convinced I had no choice." She turned to face him. "But I've spent 6 weeks discovering who I actually am when I'm not performing for society's approval, and that woman will not go back to being Evan Radcliffe's pawn." "He's counting on your sense of duty," Asher observed. "Your concern for your family. He thinks if he applies enough pressure there, you'll capitulate." "He doesn't know me at all, does he?" Lauren felt a grim smile touch her lips. "He spent 2 years courting me and never bothered to see past the performance. He thinks I'm empty, bloodless, a perfect automaton who can be controlled through the right combination of social pressure and family obligation." "Are you worried about your parents?" Asher asked gently. "The letter mentions their suffering." Lauren considered this honestly. "I'm sorry they're experiencing social difficulty, truly, but my mother's primary concern has always been appearance over substance, and my father chose to disown me rather than question why I'd flee my own wedding. They made their priorities clear." She paused, feeling the old grief, but also a new clarity. "I can't sacrifice my entire life to protect them from the consequences of their own values." "That's not cold, Lauren. That's self-preservation." "Is it?" She moved back to the desk, picking up the letter again, studying the carefully crafted manipulation. "Because part of me still feels guilty. Still hears that voice saying a good daughter would go back, would make this right, would do her duty. And the other part, The other part is furious. The anger rose as she spoke, controlled, but intense. Evan tried to use me, was caught, and his response is to reframe the entire situation so he remains the hero and I become the problem to be solved. He's not even pretending remorse, just recalculating his strategy to achieve the same goal: access to my family's fortune. She looked at Asher directly. He thinks I'll break. That eventually the isolation, the guilt, the social pressure will be too much, and I'll come crawling back, grateful that he's willing to overlook my instability. He's giving me time to come to my senses, like this is all just a temporary rebellion that will pass. What do you want to do? Asher's voice was calm, but she heard the steel underneath. The courier is waiting. You could send a reply. Lauren thought about the woman she'd been 6 weeks ago, perfectly controlled, meticulously planning every detail of a life that would have destroyed her slowly from the inside. Then she thought about who she'd become, someone who rode along cliffs at breakneck speed, who understood estate management and crop rotations, who had actual opinions about things that mattered, and a friend who valued her mind. Tell the courier there will be no reply, she said clearly, and that his services won't be needed again. Asher nodded, something like pride flickering in his grey eyes. Consider it done. After he'd left to dismiss the courier, Lauren stood alone in the study, still holding the letter. She should feel afraid. Evan was powerful, vindictive, and apparently willing to wage a campaign of social destruction. He would escalate when this summons was ignored, but instead of fear, she felt a strange, fierce calm. Let him spread his rumors. Let him paint her as mad or scandalous or whatever narrative served his purposes. None of it touched her here. None of it could force her back into that cage. She'd chosen freedom over reputation, authenticity over acceptance, herself over society's expectations, and she would make that choice again, as many times as necessary. Lauren walked to the fireplace and held the letter to the flames, watching the expensive paper curl and blacken, the careful manipulation turning to ash. When Asher returned, he found her standing there, the last fragments of the letter disintegrating in the fire. He'll come himself eventually, she said without turning, when the letters don't work, when he realizes I won't simply comply. I know. Asher moved to stand beside her. And when he does, you won't face him alone. Lauren looked at him and felt gratitude mixed with something deeper, something she wasn't quite ready to name. Thank you. For what? For treating me like someone worth defending. Not because of my family's money or my social connections, but because I'm a person who deserves respect and autonomy. Asher's expression softened. That's not something you should have to thank anyone for, Lauren. It should be a given. In a better world, perhaps. She turned back to the fire, watching the last of the letter burn away. But we live in this one, and in this one, people like Evan see people like me as assets to be acquired, not individuals with our own will. Then we'll teach him differently, Asher said quietly. When he comes. They arrived on a cold afternoon, 2 weeks later, their carriage appearing on the coastal road like an ill omen. Lauren was in the stables with Asher, discussing the new foals, when Morrison came running, his weathered face tight with concern. Lord Vance, there's a carriage approaching, London plates by the look of it. Fine horses, too fine for a casual visit. Asher's expression went still and dangerous. How many passengers? 2 that I could see, my lord, a gentleman and a lady. Lauren's stomach dropped. She didn't need to ask who it was. She'd known this moment was coming since she'd burned that letter, known that Evan wouldn't accept silence as an answer. Go inside, Asher said quietly, his hand touching her elbow. You don't have to see them. Yes, I do. Lauren's voice was steady despite the fear coiling in her chest. If I hide, He'll use it as proof of my instability. I need to face this. By the time they reached the house, the carriage had pulled up to the entrance. Lauren watched from the drawing-room window as the door opened and Evan stepped down, resplendent in a dark traveling coat, every inch the concerned gentleman. Then he turned to hand down his companion, and Lauren's hands clenched into fists. Chloe. Of course he'd brought Chloe. Her cousin looked pale and beautiful in dove grey, the picture of worried propriety. The optics were perfect. The devoted fiancé and the concerned cousin, travelling all this way to rescue poor, unstable Lauren from her isolation. Mrs. Kellen showed them into the drawing-room with barely concealed disapproval. Evan entered first, his expression carefully arranged into concern and relief, when he saw Lauren standing by the fireplace with Asher at her side. Something flickered across his face, surprise that she looked so well, perhaps, or annoyance that she wasn't the trembling wreck he'd expected. "Lauren, thank God." His voice was warm, intimate, as if they were alone. "When you didn't respond to Lady Ashford's letter, I feared the worst. I had to come myself, to see that you were well. As you can see, I'm perfectly well." Lauren's tone was cool and controlled. "You've wasted a journey, Your Grace." Evan's eyes slid to Asher, and his expression hardened briefly before smoothing back into concern. "Lord Vance, I wasn't aware you and Miss Whitcomb were acquainted." "We've become well acquainted over the past weeks." Asher's voice was dangerously quiet. "Miss Whitcomb has been a guest at Thornwell, under my protection." The word protection hung in the air with deliberate weight. Chloe's eyes widened slightly, and Lauren saw the calculation behind her cousin's careful expression. "How kind of you," Evan said, his tone suggesting anything but kindness. "However, Lauren's family has been desperately worried. Her mother is quite unwell with the stress. I've come to escort her home, where she belongs." "I'm not going anywhere with you." Lauren stepped forward, drawing both their attention. "I'm not returning to London, and I'm certainly not marrying you. I thought I made that clear when I walked away from the altar." "You were overwrought," Evan said smoothly, moving closer with the easy confidence of a man accustomed to getting his way. "Wedding nerves combined with an unfortunate misunderstanding." "I misunderstood nothing." Lauren's voice cut like a blade. "I heard you tell Chloe that marrying me was a financial transaction, that I was a bloodless automaton, that your only interest in me was my family's fortune. Those weren't words that required interpretation, Evan." Chloe made a soft sound of distress. "Lauren, please, you're twisting everything. Evan loves you. We were merely discussing—" "You were kissing him." Lauren turned her cold gaze on her cousin, passionately, 20 minutes before I was supposed to walk down the aisle. "Don't insult my intelligence by pretending otherwise." Evan's mask cracked slightly, irritation bleeding through. "You're being dramatic and unreasonable. Yes, I have feelings for Chloe. I won't deny that. But marriage isn't about passion, Lauren. You know that. It's about alliance, compatibility, mutual benefit. We would have had a perfectly functional marriage if you hadn't indulged this fit of romantic hysteria." "Functional." Lauren felt a bitter smile touch her lips. "You're right. It would have been functional. For you. You'd have had access to my fortune, freedom to continue your affair, and a wife who managed your household while you bankrupted my family's legacy to pay your father's gambling debts." Evan's face flushed dark red. "How dare you? How dare I speak the truth?" Lauren's voice rose slightly, controlled fury giving it strength. "You came here expecting to find me broken, desperate, willing to accept whatever scraps of dignity you'd allow me. But I'm not that woman anymore. I'm not the perfect automaton you thought you could control, and I will never marry you. You have no choice." Evan's composure shattered completely. "Do you understand what you've done? Your family is ruined. Your reputation is destroyed. No one will have you now. You'll die alone and impoverished. A cautionary tale about women who don't know their place. I'd rather die alone than live as your possession. Lauren. Chloe tried a different approach, her voice soft and pleading. We're family. I know you're hurt, but think about your future. Evan is offering you a second chance. He's offering himself a second chance at my money, Lauren corrected. And you're here because you know that if he doesn't marry me, he can't afford to keep you in the style you've become accustomed to. This isn't about my well-being. It's about salvaging your comfortable arrangement. Evan took a step closer, his voice dropping to that intimate tone he'd once used to court her. Lauren, be reasonable. What do you think will happen if you refuse? You'll stay here, hidden away in Scotland. You think Lord Vance will protect you indefinitely out of the goodness of his heart? He laughed, sharp and cruel. Men don't offer women sanctuary without expecting payment of some kind. You would think that, Asher said, his voice cutting through the room like ice. Since you're incapable of acting without calculating the benefit to yourself, but then you've never understood the concept of integrity. Evan rounded on him. This doesn't concern you, Vance. Lauren is my fiancé. She was never truly your fiancé. She was a transaction you failed to complete. Asher moved to stand beside Lauren, solid and immovable. And she's made her position clear. You're not wanted here. Leave. I'm not leaving without her. Evan's voice turned ugly. I have rights. The engagement contract, the agreements between our families. Contracts signed under false pretenses have no legal standing, Asher countered. You courted Miss Whitcomb while conducting an affair, concealing your true financial situation and motivations. Any competent solicitor would tear your claim to pieces. Then I'll destroy her another way. Evan's facade had completely crumbled now, revealing the desperate, vicious man beneath. I'll spread the word that she's been living here, unchaperoned, in seclusion with you. By tomorrow, every drawing room in London will be discussing her moral degradation. She'll be more than ruined. She'll be infamous. The threat hung in the air, and Lauren felt something cold settle in her stomach. It was exactly what he would do, and it would be devastatingly effective. Then Asher spoke, his voice calm and absolutely certain. That won't be necessary. Miss Whitcomb hasn't been unchaperoned. She's been staying as my honored guest under the care of my housekeeper in complete propriety. He paused, and Lauren felt him look at her, felt the weight of what he was about to say. And she won't be leaving as Miss Whitcomb. She'll be leaving as my wife. The room went absolutely silent. Lauren's heart stopped, her breath catching in her throat. Asher turned to face her fully, his grey eyes steady and sure. If you'll have me, Lauren. A marriage of alliance and respect, protection and partnership. I'm offering you my name, my position, and my complete support. No obligations beyond what you choose to give, just safety and freedom, and a future where you dictate your own terms. Lauren stared at him, understanding the magnitude of what he was offering. Not just protection from Evan's threats, but permanent, unassailable sanctuary. The social armor of marriage to a lord whose reputation, while unconventional, was unimpeachable. You can't be serious, Evan sputtered, his face mottled with rage. You'd marry her? A woman who ran from her own wedding? She's damaged goods, Vance. She's the bravest woman I've ever met, Asher said without looking away from Lauren. And she deserves better than a man who sees her as goods to be evaluated. Lauren looked into his eyes and saw absolute sincerity, saw the respect and genuine care he'd shown her these past weeks. This wasn't a romantic proposal. It was something better. It was an offer of true partnership from someone who valued her mind and spirit. "Yes," she said clearly, her voice steady and sure. "Yes, I'll marry you." Evan's face went from mottled red to an alarming shade of purple. For a moment, Lauren thought he might actually strike something. Instead, he turned on Asher with barely controlled fury. "You think this solves anything? You think society will accept this farce of a marriage? She left me at the altar, Vance, fled like a mad woman in her wedding gown. Now, weeks later, she's conveniently marrying my greatest rival." He laughed, a harsh, bitter sound. "You've both just guaranteed your complete social destruction. Every door in London will be closed to you. Every respectable family will cut you entirely. You'll be pariahs." "Good," Asher said calmly. "I walked away from London society years ago because I found it morally bankrupt and intellectually barren. Being ostracized by hypocrites isn't a threat. It's a relief. You're insane. Both of you." Evan turned to Lauren, his voice dropping to something almost pleading. "Lauren, think about what you're doing. You'll never be received in polite society again. Your family will disown you completely. Is this really worth throwing everything away?" Lauren felt the old fear try to rise. The terror of social death, of disappointing her family, of stepping outside the carefully drawn lines of acceptable behavior. Then she looked at Asher, solid and certain beside her, and thought of the past weeks. The freedom of riding along the cliffs, the satisfaction of work that actually mattered, the rare gift of friendship built on honesty rather than performance. "I already threw it away," she said quietly. "When I walked out of that cathedral. You just haven't accepted it yet." "This is absurd," Chloe spoke up, her voice higher than usual, tinged with something that sounded like panic. "Evan, tell her what she's giving up. The position, the security, the cage," Lauren interrupted. "That's what I'm giving up, Chloe. A beautiful gilded cage, where I'd have spent my life being someone else's chess piece, where I'd have watched my husband conduct an affair with my own cousin while I smiled and played the perfect hostess. Tell me, is that really what you think I should choose?" Chloe's face crumpled slightly, and for the first time, Lauren saw something genuine in her cousin's expression. Fear. Because if Evan couldn't secure the Whitcomb fortune through Lauren, what use was Chloe to him? The comfortable future she'd been imagining would crumble just as surely as his estates. "You're making a grave mistake," Evan said, his voice tight with controlled rage. "Both of you. I have influence, connections. I'll make sure everyone knows exactly what happened here. That you seduced her, Vance, took advantage of a vulnerable woman in a moment of weakness." "Say whatever you like," Asher replied, his voice still that infuriating calm. "Spin whatever narrative makes you feel better about being rejected. We won't be in London to hear it. You think you can hide up here forever? Scotland isn't the end of the earth. No, but it's far enough from your reach." Asher moved slightly, a subtle shift that somehow made him seem larger, more formidable. "You've lost, Radcliffe. Accept it with whatever grace you can muster and leave. You're not welcome at Thornwell." For a long moment, Evan stared at them both, his expression cycling through rage, disbelief, and finally cold calculation. "This isn't over," he said quietly. "You think you've won, but you've just made a powerful enemy." "I already had a powerful enemy," Asher said. "One more doesn't concern me." Evan turned sharply on his heel. "Come, Chloe. There's nothing more to be done here. Let them have their pathetic exile." Chloe hesitated, looking at Lauren with something that might have been regret, or might have been resentment. "I hope you know what you're doing," she said softly. "I do," Lauren replied. "For the first time in my life, I actually do." They left in a flurry of expensive coats and wounded pride, their carriage pulling away with unnecessary speed. Lauren watched from the window until it disappeared down the coastal road, taking with it the last physical remnant of her old life. When she turned back, Asher was watching her with an expression she couldn't quite read. "Are you all right?" he asked quietly. "I don't know." Lauren moved to the chair by the fire, her legs suddenly unsteady. "You just proposed marriage to save me from scandal. That's an extraordinary thing to do for someone you've known barely 2 months." Asher sat across from her, his posture relaxed but his eyes serious. "I didn't propose to save you from scandal, Lauren. I proposed because you deserve protection, respect, and the freedom to live life on your own terms. And because—" He paused, choosing his words carefully. "These past weeks have shown me that a partnership built on mutual respect and genuine friendship is worth far more than any romantic fantasy." "But marriage," Lauren said softly, "it's permanent, legal. You'd be binding yourself to me, to my ruined reputation, to whatever consequences come from this choice. I'd be binding myself to an intelligent, courageous woman who shares my values and whose company I genuinely enjoy," Asher corrected. "That seems like an excellent foundation for a marriage. Better than most, certainly." Lauren felt something warm unfurl in her chest. Not the desperate passion she'd once imagined marriage should involve, but something steadier and more precious. Trust, respect. The quiet certainty that she'd found someone who saw her clearly and chose her anyway. "I don't love you," she said, needing to be honest. "Not in the romantic sense. I care for you deeply. I respect you immensely, but I know." Asher's gray eyes were understanding. "I don't love you that way either, but I value you more than I've valued anyone in years, and I think that might be a better foundation than passion, which burns hot and fades. What we have, this honesty, this partnership, that's built to last." "A marriage of alliance and respect," Lauren said slowly, testing the words. "Not duty and deceit." "Exactly." She looked at him, this man who'd offered her sanctuary when she had nothing, who'd treated her as an equal, who was now offering her his name and protection without demanding anything she wasn't willing to give. And she realized that somewhere in the past weeks, Asher Vance had become the person she trusted most in the world. "Then yes," she said clearly. "Not because I'm desperate or afraid, but because I genuinely choose this. Choose you. Choose the life we could build together." The smile that crossed Asher's face was warm and real. "Good. Then we'll do this properly. Small ceremony, just us and the household. Nothing like the spectacle you planned before." "Nothing like that," Lauren agreed, and felt only relief. They were married a week later in the small stone kirk overlooking the sea. Mrs. Kellen served as witness along with Morrison and the local minister, a pragmatic man who asked no questions about London scandals. Lauren wore a simple dress of deep blue, her hair loose in the wind, no veil to hide behind. When Asher placed the ring on her finger, a simple band of Scottish silver, and spoke his vows in that steady, certain voice, Lauren felt something settle deep in her soul. This was right. Not perfect, not the fairy tale she'd once imagined, but real and true and entirely her own choice. The gathering afterward was small, just the household sharing a meal in Thornwell's dining room. No society matrons judging every detail, no complex seating charts, no performance required. Just honest celebration among people who wished them well. That evening, Lauren stood at her window, their window now, looking out at the wild sea. The sky was turning purple and gold with sunset, the waves crashing endlessly against the cliffs. Asher came to stand beside her, and they watched in comfortable silence. Any regrets? He asked quietly. Lauren thought about the woman she'd been, meticulous, controlled, living a life scripted by others. Then she thought about who she'd become, free, authentic, choosing her own path, even when it meant losing everything she'd been taught to value. None, she said, and meant it absolutely. This is the first choice I've ever made that was entirely mine. Whatever comes next, I chose it. That makes all the difference. Asher's hand found hers, a gesture of partnership rather than possession. Then we'll face it together, whatever comes. Lauren squeezed his hand, feeling the solid reality of this new alliance. She'd lost her family, her reputation, her place in society. But she'd gained something infinitely more valuable: herself, her autonomy, her courage, and a partner who valued her for exactly who she was. The perfect wedding she'd planned so meticulously had ended in ashes. But from those ashes, she'd built something better, a life of her own choosing, fierce and true and authentically hers. As the sun set over the Scottish coast, Lauren Vance stood beside her husband and looked toward the future without fear. She had finally stopped performing someone else's script and started writing her own story. And it was only just beginning. The end.
Thank you for watching this story to the end. If you enjoyed this story, you will surely love the next one. It's as crazier and more intriguing as you can ever imagine. So do check it out. Click on the image showing on your screen right now to watch the next one. Don't forget to subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye for now.